Some of them are not even fenced. When you take an instance of what is happening at Dusamba, the university is, is closer to where bandits are. I mean, where you have bandits in the Kazana area, creating problem. Moving into the camp.
Steven, you have to round up now, please.
So what I'm trying to say is that we need to really improve on the budget of this university. At least give them, we should give them at least 10 billion naira so that they can improve their infrastructure. With this, I urge my colleagues to please look at what these universities need, education sector as a whole, so that we can improve on their budget, so that they can really perform their function in providing knowledge to our youth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Mao Waban.
Mr. President, distinguished Senator Mao Waban, Mr. President, I want to thank God we are this ritual again, because it has become a ritual for us to discuss the budget at this time. But, Mr. President, this is an estimate, and it behoves on us as a Senate or as a Parliament to allocate these funds to the MDAs in the area of need and the sectors that will affect our people positively, that will affect our citizenry. So why I'm saying this is that it's for us to know that a lot is being expected of us as a Senate, that from this estimate we should be able to allocate the funds properly in accordance with the books, that is the Constitution and the area of need. So that takes me to the allocation or the estimate or the budget to the health sector. Mr. President, we are leaving our country, Nigeria, going to different countries on health vacation or medical vacation. It's just because those countries have spent so much on their health care. And if we must attain that level, then we must spend right. So what I'm saying, Mr. President, is that if you look at the allocation to the health sector, it's a far cry from what is there in the Constitution or in the Act. Mr. President, I think will make a lot of difference this time around, especially having you as a medical doctor. I know that one of the landmarks and hallmarks of the 7th Assembly was the National Health Act, which was quite celebrated world over. But it's unfortunate that from 2014 to this date, a particular and important critical section of that bill has not been implemented. I think as lawmakers, we should not be lawbreakers, and we should not encourage the executive to break law. So I stand here, Mr. President, to say that one thing this country will remember you and this Senate for is that we will ensure that that constitutional, that act, that law that says that at least 1% of the constitutional revenue fund should be spent in the health sector. And I want to stay here that, Mr. President, let's record it, and this time around we should make it happen, and let the executive know that we are lawmakers and we encourage adherence to law. Having said that again, Mr. President, I want to thank the leader that he christened this budget the budget of recovery. I want to agree with him completely, because we need to recover. So many things to recover from. We need to recover from hunger, we need to recover from power, we need to recover from everything. Even in short, we are recessing into darkness. Look at power now. We've gone from 5,000 to 1,000 megawatts. So, Mr. President, it's important that not only looking at the sectoral allocation, power is a critical area. And it's not a place that you have works, power, housing. Power is serious. And I'm suggesting, I'm moving here, that we should ask the executive to split power, to remove power, to separate power from works, from housing, so that power will be independent. And we look at other areas of alternative power. We should spend more on renewable energy, because we spend so much on the other arm and they are not working. So all I'm saying is that we should look at that area. It is very, very critical and important. We are talking about youth empowerment. Look at how much we've allocated to labor. We spend 17. What are we going to do when we are supposed to be setting up entrepreneurial centers in almost all the local governments of this country, so that we can diversify economy, so that we can create employment for our teeming youth? Mr. President, it is important. And finally, it's not after speaking here allocating. What about the implementation? My brother already talked about spending. This is time to spend to inflate the economy. We need to spend in critical areas, in road construction, building bridges, building primary health care centers, building hospitals. But unfortunately, 2016 budget, what is the level of implementation as we speak? There is no money in the system. So it is important that not just talking about budget, but we talk about budget implementation, so that this 2017, as a committee, as a Senate, we must follow our oversight critically to ensure that funds allocated are being utilized for the purpose it is meant for. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Dino Milai.
Mr. President, my respected colleagues, Dino Milai, Kogi West, you speak the truth, you die. You refuse to speak the truth, you die. I have chosen to speak the truth and die. Mr. President, the deficit in the 2017 budget of 2.23 trillion naira is an equivalent of 2.18% of Nigeria's GDP, which will take overall debt of 14% of our GDP. Mr. President, the former Central Bank Governor, Charles Soludo, argued in 2012 that by 2050, there will be almost 400 million Nigerians. Before then, Mr. President, between 29 and 40 years, Nigerian oil would have finished. The question now is this: how the future and prosperity of the 400 million Nigerians will be guaranteed should constitute the agenda for a national emergency, and that should be our focus. Mr. President, it has also been argued and recently established by the International Energy Agency that they forecasted that the US, which has been the major market for Nigerian oil exports, will become the #1 oil producer in the world in 2017 and will become a net exporter of oil by 2030. This brings us to the question: what is our preparation, budget after budget, to diversify our economy and depend less on oil? Today we are here. It is sad to note that for a country to operate a deficit budget, meaning to spend more than our earnings to a larger extent, is unhealthy for an emerging market like Nigeria. Mr. President, 7.03 trillion budget estimate is too ambitious. Mr. President, the truth be told. Mr. President, this particular budget, as presented, will have 7% in each recurrent expenditure borrowed, meaning what we are borrowing is not exclusively for investment and for capital. It is also going to be spent on recurrent. Mr. President, no wise nation in the world will borrow to squander, because as far as recurrent is concerned, you are spending. It has no resultant effect on the masses, Talakawas, Mekunus, and have-nots in this country. Mr. President, security must be taken very seriously. I will not waste our time. the solution to our problem, knowing fully well that in the next few years we will be about 400 million people. In the next 29 to 40 years there will be no more oil. Mr. President, the solution to that is agriculture. 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 Government must invest heavily in the non-oil sector, and the most vibrant of it all is agriculture. There's a popular saying, Mr. President, I will want you to listen to this, Mr. President. Please pause my time. Mr. President, I will want you to listen to this. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Failure to plan is planning to fail. For you to succeed as an individual and nation, you must picture a future you want to feature in. What I am saying is that during the one, we had the third developmental plan. During Obasanjo, we had Operation Feed the Nation. During Shagari, you had Green Revolution and housing. And we had Shagari low-cost housing estates in all the states of the Federation. During Abacha, you had Vision 2020. During Vision 2010. During Obasanjo and during Jonathan, Yaradua, you had 7-point agenda. During Jonathan, you have transformation agenda. It is high time for this government to develop an agenda. Where there is no vision, the people perish. It is high time we develop an agenda that will be articulated so that in the nearest future, our agenda must marry our budget. Today, the same amount of money we want to spend on capital is the same amount of money we want to borrow. If we don't get to borrow, what will happen to capital? Mr. President, the time for us as a nation to sit down and pause has come. The time for us to articulate a developmental agenda in addition to anti-corruption has come. Mr. President, let's make a while the sun shines.
Senator John Eno.
Mr. President, my name is John Owan Eno, Cross River Central. Mr. President, I join in this debate, and a few weeks ago, the National Assembly passed the medium-term expenditure framework. The budget proposals for 2017 are based on economic recovery and growth. And this budget is based on some key assumptions. And I think that those assumptions have become commonplace already. But I think that there are a few of them that we need to have a look again at. And these assumptions have to do with the daily oil production of oil could have approved for 2.2 million barrels. I think it is very, very important that the ongoing initiatives at the Niger Delta be sustained by the present administration. And when you look at the fact that there is an assumption, there's an expectation that for 2017, the GDP growth rate for this country is going to be about 3.02%. We need to be able to look at the realism of that. When you do a budget, that budget must be realistic, it must be based on some facts. If you look at the fact that for 3 consecutive quarters in 2016, the third quarter GDP growth rate was minus 2.24. If you look at the fact that international organizations, IMF, World Bank, project that the country is going to grow at about 1% in 2017. What it means, therefore, is that it's going to take us too much to be able to achieve our 3.0%, and we need to be able to understand that. If you look at, and there are a few things that will make this even more impossible. There are a few things that we are grappling with. I think the greatest challenge of this country and this government and this economy is to see how we can get out of recession. And we need to be very particular and be very focused on that. Now, there are a few initiatives that are contained in the 2017 budget. If you look at 2016 and backwards, the country has spent at least 1 trillion every year in terms of cash call. For 2017, there is an innovation. Even 1 kobo is not going to be spent on cash call. That is because the executive thinks it wants to explore new funding mechanisms that are going to be based on cost reduction of cost, and are going to try to free up money for exploration and for production. I think it's important that the National Assembly puts the executive to the strictest task. Let's be able to know what these new funding mechanisms are. Let's be able to appreciate how much the country, the cost benefit of what is very, very important. And I think my earlier colleagues have mentioned the fact of borrowing to be able to fund the budget. I mean, for example, what we have as gross federally collected revenue for 2017 is 4.94 trillion. And the government wants to spend about 7.29 trillion. If you look at it compared to the figure aggregate expenditure for 2016, it's about 20% increase. But in real terms, it's reduced by about 28.5%. So that means that if you look at inflation, look at devaluation, we will be spending 7.29, but in real terms, we're spending less. And I think that I'd like to introduce an issue, for example, that is going to be debatable, that is going to be hotly contested, and that, what is it? Wages and salaries. During the IBB years, when SAP was introduced, before SAP, the exchange rate was $1 to £1. After SAP, it jumped up. Nothing happened to salaries and allowances and wages. So what happened was that the average Nigerian worker was subjected to suffering. I remember those days in the university. On my door as a university teacher, we had some certain things that were written, my take-home pay can't take me home. The government is a joke, and the wages it pays are a joke. All those kinds of things. We are getting back to those years. And I think the National Assembly must lead the charge for increase in wages. It must lead the charge. If you look at the National Assembly budget, for about 5 years now, so it's about, what is it? There's public outcry. But in real terms, how much is this money? How many people in the country depend on the expenditure the National Assembly members make, or those who work make? So I think, for example, that we're earning more naira, but that more naira is getting us less and less money. Unfortunately for us, if you look at the recurrent expenditure, recurrent budget, and you disaggregate it, you're going to find out that personnel budget is about the hugest. The problem is that we need to be ready to expand the productive capacity of our revenue base to be able to make more money in order to be able to increase wages and salaries. Unless we do so, even one of the fine points of this budget, trying to see how to encourage investments, trying to see how to better the lives of Nigerians, won't be able to achieve this. And I think that we need to be able to look at this one way or the other. If you look at some other issues in this budget, you look at the fact of the joint venture cash call have already, indebtedness to contractors. As of today, if you look at the total indebtedness to contractors, about 2 trillion. Unless government, and the budget talks about the fact that they are trying to see how to make sure that these are properly verified in order to see the best way to be able to pay. I think that for 2017, and I'm aware that the Minister of Finance is talking about coming up with some initiatives that talk about bonds and all that to settle this. I think in a country that is going on through recession, freeing up this kind of money to contractors is going to provide some kind of jump, some kind of leap to people's expenditure patterns, which if you look at our GDP every year, you find that in terms of expenditures, it accounts for about 47% of what eventually becomes our GDP. It's important for this government to encourage these kinds of expenditures. If you look at the capital recurrent ratio, you find out, for example, that capital expenditure for 2017 is projected at about 2.24 trillion. And you compare this to the fact that the deficit is about 2.36 trillion. And about 98% of this is going to be borrowed. I think that, like somebody has mentioned earlier on, we need to be careful. In the 21st century, we cannot afford to borrow money to service recurrent budget. And I think that by the time the National Assembly is passing this budget, we need to be very careful, working with our different committees, to make sure that we are not approving a borrowing figure that also accommodates any little percentage in terms of servicing of recurrent expenditure. And then if you look at the implications of these various issues and all that, the borrowing, our experience of borrowing in terms of 2016, that you find out that nearly everything that was borrowed in 2016 came from domestic sources. If you look at the ratio, even in 2017 budget proposal, you find out that foreign borrowing for about 46%, domestic is about 54%. But in real terms, for most of 2016, almost about, by the time it got about the third quarter of 2016, deficit borrowing had accounted for about 52%. And of this, nearly all of this came from domestic sources. And if you talk about the country having to borrow about 52% of this deficit from internal sources, what it means is that the government, the public sector, is in competition with the private sector for scarce resources. And this has implications. Now, what is happening to foreign borrowing? Why weren't we able to access foreign borrowing in 2016? What are the guarantees that in 2017 this is going to be possible? If it's not possible, what is the implication in terms of even the 4.94 trillion gross federally collectible revenue that government expects? If you look at the components of what government expects, about 1.9 trillion is expected from oil sources, about 2.94 from non-oil sources. Of this 2.94, if you look at government independent revenue, about 800 and something billion is supposed to come from that source. In 2016, about 1.5 trillion was expected. By the end of 2016, less than 500 billion had been borrowed. When the first MTEF came, it projected that internal, independent revenue of government was going to be about close to 1 point something trillion. It's been scaled down to 800 billion. Now, if we can't even make half of that, what it means is that the 2017 budget proposals in terms of revenue projections are from the start not realistic. If they are not realistic, what it means is that whatever government expects to grow the economy, to make things better for 2017, will also not be achievable. And I think that at this point we need to be guided and minded by all these in terms of the eventual approval of the 2017 budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Olujimi. Yes, point of order.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm Mohammed Ali Ndume, representing Borno South. Mr. President, my point of order is order 15. And I read, any senator may rise at any time to speak on a matter of privilege suddenly arising, and he shall be prepared to move without a motion declaring that a contempt or breach has been committed. Mr. President, when you announced the debate on the budget, you asked us to write down our names, and I wrote my name, and my name is listed after distinguished Senator Dino. So I was prepared and I was following, but I didn't hear you call my name. So I don't know when I'll contribute again or when the exchanges.
Senator Ndume, as I sit down here, I think by this I take the order in directing the affairs of the chambers. And the list I have is the list I'm going by. I don't know whether that list, so we'll follow my list and you will be called in due time. So I don't know the list that you are talking about. The only list that matters is the list that I have in front of me, and I'm going with that list. Senator Olujimi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to add my voice to this ritual. And Mr. President, I am Biodun Olujimi, Ekiti South, and I am proudly PDP. Let me start, Mr. President, by saying that this is the second ritual for this government to bring a budget proposal to these chambers. And after this, there will be only one more major budget. And there is the need for this government to look at the budget and ensure that it meets all its pronouncements and all its aspirations as espoused when it was coming into government. Let me say, Mr. President, that the two budgets so far have not met the benchmark proposed by this government. Mr. President, we're in recession. And let me state clearly that there are two critical areas to drive this country and ensure that money is in the hands of the ordinary man. And that is through youth development and women development and empowerment. Mr. President, this budget does not show anything that the government has planned to put money in the hands of this sector of the economy. And I say this because the budget of women development last year was 3.5 billion. This year, it's 5.4 billion. I understand that there are some sectoral allocations in the SDG, in works, in agriculture for women. But do they ever get them? The answer is no. These budgets are usually given to anybody that is preferred by the various MDAs. And that is not good enough. There has to be proper planning for youth development and employment. There also has to be proper planning for women development for us to get out of the woods. And I don't think this government that rode on the change mantra has been able to achieve that. Mr. President, my concerns are very basic and very general. One of them is that we need to ask questions on the zero budgeting. This government told us every budget will be under that scheme, but there has not been any budget, any of the two, that has fallen into that group up till now. Why is that so? Don't they have data? Don't they have people who are capable of doing the bidding of government? Two, the TSA. How far have we gone with the TSA? Has it done well? At the beginning, the noise was about, oh, TSA will give us so much funds. It will harness all the expenditure and the income. Where are we now? We are getting worse into the woods. 3, 500 billion intervention fund. Mr. President, I believe we're creating another stratum of the poor. Poor people who will be given 5,000. What can 5,000 do in this current recession? Are we creating another line of the poor? What planning have we put in place to ensure that they have jobs, to ensure that they can go to the market and trade, to ensure that the poor person out there has something to do rather than dole out 5,000? And the 5,000 does not even go to the poor. It goes to preferred individuals who probably take for 20 people or 100 people at once. Mr. President, this government has to get data and plan properly so that the last budget that is available to them to show the people that they really meant well by asking us to change must be properly done to address the problems of the poor and to ensure that we don't dole out money. We give people, we don't give them fish, we teach them how to catch fish. Also, the issue of diversification of the economy, I believe is just plenty of lip service, because this budget does not reflect such. Agriculture has moved marginally, but you see, it's not enough for us to have figures. We need to know what plans have gone into those figures. Figures on their own cannot achieve results. There has to be proper planning. We need to know what the Agric Ministry wants to do for women, for the youths, and for the various sectors. We need to know what tourism is going to do and bring back into Nigeria. We need to be able to also look at the issue of the exchange rate. It is only in Nigeria that we have 7 different exchange rates. It is affecting our economy, it is affecting our businesses, it is affecting our spending power. The time has come for this government to look at a way by which they will merge all the various rates and close them up so that what we see is really what we get. time has come for this government to sit up and, like Senator Dino said, have a vision. Without a vision, this country will drift into depression. And the government has only one more budget to achieve that. This budget will probably paper a few cracks, but will not address the real issues. I believe government needs to sit up so that the next budget will really address the issues and will be zero-based as was promised earlier. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Bocha.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. My name is Emmanuel Bocha. I represent the farming population of Taraba South. Mr. President, I want to say, at the risk of repeating what has been said, I dwell on specifics, and I'll be very, very brief and concise. Mr. President, looking at the figure, the budget estimate for this year, ordinarily one would say there is hope because you call 7.2 trillion as against the 6.1 trillion of 2016 Appropriation Act. But unfortunately, there appears to be no any hope actually in this. Why do I say this? I'm looking at what is going on in the population. Like my colleague earlier on said, a budget is meant to take care of a specific population, a population in which you have the figure. If I may ask, which population are we budgeting for? Is it the Nigerian population or the outsiders that have trooped into Nigeria in their numbers and are killing people for sport? Do we plan for them? Do we take care of these people? Do we know their numbers? Because this figure, like I said, appears to be very, very hopeful. That we have had a budget of 6.1 trillion in 2016, and this year is 7.2 trillion, then one would have said this year will be better. But lo and behold, it may not. I don't want to go into the politics of borrowing, because that's a different ball game. Like I said earlier on, I represent a population that is largely agrarian, and I'm concerned about agriculture because nothing significantly had been done to show that we are truly committed to promoting the agricultural sector or investing in agriculture. We don't appear to match our talks with actions. We don't appear to walk the talk, as it's been often said. And I think we must learn to live like true leaders. Otherwise, when we say a thing and we do another thing, it's becoming increasingly embarrassing. 90 billion for agriculture from a budget of 7.2 trillion is simply inadequate. It's simply inadequate for a government that is talking about diversification. Of course, this is a word that is very common in the mouth of most of us. Every senator mentions diversification because this is something that is very dear to us. We love to see that we effect a move. There is a shift from our dependence on the oil and the mono economy that had been in place ab initio. But I think if we are going to do that, we must be practical about it. This we are not doing. We keep talking in the media. People who do image laundry come out and talk diversification, and yet nothing is reflected in this. And I think it's becoming too much. Let me say something that the success of budget, Mr. President, is measured on its implementation. Here, I want to say, in fairness to the establishment, in fairness to the government of the day, I am seeing a remarkable improvement in budget implementation. Because I want to put politics apart. While I was walking to the chambers this morning, an agency that is involved in implementing our intervention project called me and said they have received information and approval of additional release of 30% of the budget, meaning the budget may be implemented up to the level of 80%. And I think this is my third time in the National Assembly. It's the first time I will see a budget being implemented up to 80%.
Thank you.
This appears to be, I'm talking about empirical evidence. I say let's put politics apart. Because once budget is implemented, no matter how bad is the projection, there appears to be some result at the end of the day. So I think the government deserves some commendation. If truly the implementation will be up to 80%, but there should be more a visionary projection in the budget outside of implementation. I am talking of empirical evidence. I'm talking of what I have been told, and I know this is what will happen. But let us plan to match what we say. Let us match action. Let us match words with action. What do I mean by this? What we say, we should be seen doing it. Let us stop, dancing in the public. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Mr. President.
Senator Solomon Olamlekom.
Thank you, Mr. President, very distinguished colleague, Adeola Solomon Olamlekom, representing the largest senatorial district in Nigeria in terms of population. I am from Lagos State. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, I want to sincerely thank you for this opportunity to address this distinguished colleague, distinguished Senate on the budget of 2017. Mr. President, we started with a budget of change. Now we are on a budget of recovery and growth. We don't know why the change has suddenly turned to recovery and growth. But what I know is that we are currently in recession. And it is my sincere prayer that we don't go into depression. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, I would like to start my contribution to this year's budget from the angle of the NABRO. Mr. President, all my colleagues have stood up to discuss about the 2016 performance of last year's budget. But what we have in the document before us and all that has been said, these are information emanating from the executive. These are what the executive have told us as a Senate, as a National Assembly, that the 2016 budget that we passed to them, this is how far they have gone. And I believe that if we have our NABRO place, once activities commence in this particular department, the National Assembly, it will not be their word against us. It will be us against their own. Because we will have enough data and information at our disposal to force whatever they are giving to us as their budget performance for a particular financial year. I give you an instance, Mr. President. In the year 2016, the gross collectible of the federal government revenue stood at a sum of 5.8 trillion naira to date. And what actually accrued to the federal government of Nigeria as its own share of the budget was about 2.58 trillion naira. And the total expenditure recorded to date is about 4.6 trillion naira. That gives us a gap of over 1.6 trillion naira, representing borrowing to fund the budget. These are figures only available to the executive and not to us. And these are figures emanating from the executive and not from us. How true all this figure is, we don't know. We can't even compare. There is no basis for us to see. But we have no choice. Nigeria has to continue. Nigeria has to move forward. Mr. President, a lot has been said about the budget deficit of 2.3 trillion naira, as well to marry it with a capital expenditure
of about 2.2 trillion naira for the year. Don't forget, in last year's budget, the total capital expenditure was 1.8 trillion. And as of today, the Honorable Minister of Finance has informed Nigerians that the capital expenditure for 2016 has performed to the tune of 900 billion naira. And as we speak, where that 900 billion naira has been applied to in this economy is nowhere to be found. And he identified even one single ministry, combination of three, to have been given 500 billion naira. And by that we are still in recession. Just yesterday, the Monetary Committee of the Central Bank held their meeting. They put the MPC at 14%. And they even go ahead and say the quick passage of 2017 budget will assist to stimulate the economy. That is the word. And I continue to get worried that once they pass this document to us, the next thing is there is need for quick passage. Yes, the first leg of the transaction, which is the medium-term expenditure framework, has been passed by the National Assembly. This is the second leg of the transaction. By passage of that MTEF, the dynamics on the revenue of the federal government will change, because we have raised the benchmark from 42.5 to 44.5 dollars per barrel. So that means all the reported revenue here in this document will change using that particular thing, because for instance, the gross federal collection put together in 2017 is 10.14 trillion naira, and by going by 44.5 per barrel, which we are saying, this has to change as well. Yes. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, what is my grounds concerning this deficit? Don't forget that the Honorable Minister of Finance has approached the country again and insists that unless we borrow, there is no way that Nigeria can come out of this recession. He has said it times with that number, and this one is just recently, the last 1 week. And what we are saying here is this: as Senator Dino has said, we are not going to specific. The 2.3 trillion deficit we have in this budget is to fund this budget. The actual revenue they are projecting for federal government as of this year is 4.928 trillion naira. The question is, what has changed? What has changed that necessitated or that would take us to arrive at that 4.9 trillion naira? Don't forget, in 2016, we have a budget where we have the exchange rate at 197. But you and I agree that at a point, the exchange rate goes as far as 250 naira to $1 per dollar. And nobody is asking question, why is the gap? Where is the savings that they have made? And it doesn't reflect in the 2016 budget performance given to us by the executive. This year, there are a lot of issues going around. The budget is to be predicated on 305 per dollar, and there is a school of thought that says it can't work. It's not visible, because today dollar is sold for about 510 or 509 to a naira, and at the end of the day, in the course of the year, the dollar might raise officially from 305 to about 350 naira to a dollar. And by the time they are returning to us in 2017 at the budget performance, there is no document to show that these are the savings that was made. Mr. President, that is why there is another need for us to put NABRO to work, so that all this documentation, all this information will be at our palm and will be within our district, so that we can actually know the actual budget performance for a particular year. We can have raw data to work with that will guide our sense of this thing year in, year out. As for the budget of recovery and growth, we will continue to pray. But this is, to me, it's not, I will not use the word of ambitious or a tall order to achieve, but we continue to pray for us as a nation, because all the indices, all the indicators that is contained in this document, in the MTEF document that were passed, and looking at what is the realities on ground, you will quite agree with me that it will be a little bit of a challenge for us to achieve these budget targets. So I just want to implore the House, the Senate, and everybody here seated, that yes, it should be committed to the Committee on Appropriation to look into, but while looking into all this, because my colleague has made contribution, some has made through their what they need in their committees to function, or for their ministry or agency they are supervising to function,
But the question still remains that it is what is available to us that we will spend. And the banks to borrow, they don't even have the fund to borrow. They don't even have the fund because there is no the real indicators of the economy are not there. I give you an instance. As at the last time the National Bureau of Statistics released the report to us concerning the issue of growth rate in Nigeria, we are at a deficit of about 2.something%. 2.2. And this year, our government is envisaging an increase or growth increase of about 2.something%, 3%. What that means is that the 2.2 deficit will go, and then now add another 3%, making a total of 5% growth rate. I don't know where we are going to get that. Indicators are not there today. The inflation rate is about 12.98%. The 2.9 no, it's about 18 to 19%. So, distinguished colleague, Mr. President, this is the document before us, and this is the job we need to do. So I would like to rest my case here, allow us to say one or two things, so that we see how we can move this country forward vis-a-vis the budget. Thank you very much.
Senator Ali Mekana.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Senator Francis Ali Mekana, representing the good people of Edo North. Mr. President, I have to commend Mr. President, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Nigeria for this budget. The budget that I could call budget of hope, that we address the recession in this country. Mr. President, there is no budget that is 100% free from criticism. This budget, the innovation that is introduced to it, that is zonal intervention, if it's well executed, we put smiles on the faces of most of all Nigerians, and this is commendable. Mr. President, I will say this. Let us look at the sectorial allocation. The Ministry of Power, Mines, and Housing, the allocation to these works, power and housing, is inadequate, because this ministry is very vital to the development of this country. We cannot talk of diversification when we don't have power. We cannot move our goods and services from one area to the other when we don't have a good road, and not to talk of shelter. The amount allocated to this ministry is not enough, and this is why people are now talking that they don't see what is happening in this country. There is nothing wrong in borrowing. I agree that the government should borrow. In fact, they are not borrowing enough to pushing the effect. Little borrowing will not even solve the problem, provided what we borrow is used for the purpose of the borrowing. And I believe this is a change government. The money that will be borrowed this year to add to the budget, to fund the budget, the capital project, will be used judiciously, because it's a change government. It's not like the previous administration. So, Mr. President, I will say this. Look at the road construction. The dualization of Abuja, Lokoja, Okene, Benin Road has been on for almost 10 years. Mr. President, if you pass this road, you will take a rest for 2 days. Now, the allocation of 9 billion to it is not enough to do any substantial meaningful project, to complete that project. And this road is one of the major roads that link Abuja to South-South and South-East. So, they have to look into this. Mr. President, Agenebode in Edo State is one of those ports that were approved, Ila port that was approved by the last administration. The National Ila Waterways are doing selective budgeting. They've approved a jetty for Agenebode Ila Waterways, and approved also a jetty for Ida. Now in this budget, the last budget, there was no allocation to Agenebode jetty.
And in this year's budget, there's an allocation to Ida jetty, which is 70 billion, and there was no allocation to Agenibode jetty. And Ida jetty cannot function without Agenibode. In other words, they are allocating a fund or repairing of Ida jetty that will not even work. This jetty has to work in pari passu. I will look, Mr. President, for us to look a little this sectoral allocation and address it. Now, Mr. President, I won't take much of your time. It is still good for the President to look at the settlement of Niger Delta. When we are now talking of money, we need to, if we are not stable, if the security in Niger Delta is not able to have a guaranteed certain supply of the crude oil, we will still go back to square one. So it is better for the President to address the residents in Niger Delta so that it guarantees a steady supply of crude oil. We are talking of agriculture. I don't even know, even in advanced countries that we want to talk about agriculture, they are talking of mechanized agriculture, and we are now still talking about crude agriculture. Many of our youth don't even want to farm. We should be talking about mechanized agriculture so that if we have more food in this country. They are now talking of agriculture. If we talk yellow revolution and all that, if we don't talk about mechanized agriculture, we will not get out of it. So, Mr. President, I rest my case until we get to the nitty-gritty of the committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Deputy Leader.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and my distinguished colleagues. I first of all say that after due observance of the trend of debate in respect of this 2017 budget, I think it's convenient at this stage to at least say that I'm comforted by the fact that we have succeeded in putting the platform of true exercise of democratic rights of Nigerians. This is the only time that even from within ourselves we will look at what is in the overall interest of this nation and speak the mind, not following party line as it used to be. It shows you that we have provided the platform for moving the country forward, because it is only through genuine exercise of democratic rights that issues can be brought, attention can be paid to those issues, and then remedies can be made. I have said, after the approval of the medium-term expenditure framework, that the contents of the 2017 budget will clearly anchor with what the Senate approved in the medium-term expenditure framework. If you are talking about inadequacy of sectorial allocations, yes, but we have to start in a segmented manner to where we wish to take the country to. There is nobody in this chamber who is not aware of the fact that the country is going through recession. It means the target of the 2017 budget will be to put the country back on course, restore the economy, and from it, build upon it a futuristic plan that will bring economic prosperity to the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So I think those concerns that were expressed, even though genuine, can conveniently be said to be misplaced. I therefore commend the thinking of the executive along the line of putting a budget of recovery and restoration, while I commend the National Assembly for at least carefully looking at the medium-term expenditure framework that will provide a comfortable platform for the implementation of the 2017 budget. Happily enough, distinguished Senator Buacha has clearly stated that this is his third term in the National Assembly, and that he has never seen where the budget of this nation is implemented at 80%. Look at what we are trying to do. Even at the most pressing time, the insistence on implementation of budget has always been the focal point of this administration. And I think this is what should comfort every Nigerian. It should even comfort us the more that the 2017 budget is being based on the statistics that is already available on the implementation of the 2016 budget. So in my opinion, I think that what the National Assembly will do is to try to see those adjustments that are wholly, exclusively, necessarily, and reasonably possible for the purpose of juxtaposing the intention of government to remove the economy from recession to recovery and then to restoration and recovery and restoration. I therefore thank my distinguished colleagues for arguing along that line, and I think I will rest my case this year at this place and say that I am comforted by the contents and the spirit of the budget of the 2017 budget. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Clifford Odia. Senator Matthew Rogidi.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I'm Senator Matthew Urogide. I represent the people of Edo South Senatorial District in Edo State. Mr. President, a lot of our very distinguished colleagues have presented their own contributions to this debate. They have been quite apt and very robust. Mr. President, I'll crave your indulgence so that I'll be able to address a very special and pertinent part of this budget for 2017. And that's the area that has to do with health. Mr. President, the importance of health in a country like ours cannot be overemphasized, because it has been mentioned earlier that a healthy nation or a healthy people is a wealthy nation. Mr. President, there's been a whole lot of lip service when it comes to pursuing issues that concern our people, that concern the state of their wellness. Every other sector that we have allocated resources in our budget, we come to nothing if our people are not well. Therefore, the health sector must get all the attention that it deserves. Mr. President, in 2017, we have a total budget of 7.2985 trillion naira. Out of these, we have allocated 309 billion naira to health. Out of the 309, 252 billion will go to recurrent, and 57 billion will go to capital. And if you add this, that is 309 billion naira. And if you juxtapose this against the total budget of 7.29 trillion, it comes to 4.23%. Mr. President, I want to take us back a little. 2016 budget, we had a total of 250 billion that was allocated to the health sector. This was about 3.8%. Mr. President, and the performance in the health sector in 2016 was less than 40%. And that was why it was so apparent that a huge shortfalls that we had in capital that led
to, of course, the less admission of personnel for house jobs, for internships in medicine, in pharmacy, in dietetics, in medical laboratory science, and all those medical courses. A lot of our colleagues came up here with motions saying that we are beginning to build a generation of people who were supposed to continue their training immediately after getting their university degrees. They were not taken in. And then again, we saw it that particularly in the tertiary institutions, health institutions, we could not even get equipment, and instruments. And even the policy of government to address these issues through PPP, they were not achievable. Mr. President, I want to ask, what is the problem? We have expected that when we are presenting a budget, even we as National Assembly, some of our issues must be addressed. The first one, the Abuja Declaration of 2001 made Nigeria a signatory to a pact that 15% of our annual budget should go to health. And if we were to address 15% of our annual budget, of this year's budget, we probably will have 1.1 trillion naira going to health. But, Mr. President, permit me to quickly tell you that other African countries that were signatory to this pact, what they have done. Ghana today has been able to get 6.8%. Sierra Leone, Guinea has 9%. Sierra Leone has 10.84%. Liberia has 11.86%. South Africa has 14.23%. Namibia 13.86%. Even Zimbabwe, that is buffeted from all sides with sanctions, has 8.49%. It only means that what we are doing, a lot of my colleagues already mentioned this issue. But Mr. President, please, I crave your indulgence.
You have to round up, please, sir.
There's the need for us to let us know that what the families are contributing towards their health in this country today is over 75%. And what our own external developmental partners are contributing to our budget to is over 20%. That is why even presently in the Northeast, where we have the problem of malnutrition, UNICEF has already budgeted 50,000 naira per one malnourished child in the Northeast for 600,000, and that is 30 billion. UNICEF has not budgeted for us for our malnourished children of course the 1,900,000. If you take that in our budget times 50, that is 95 billion. We don't even have that in our budget. But this assembly, sir, I want to tell you, we owe a responsibility to ensure our law. 2014 law, the Health Act, says that we must get 1% of our consolidated revenue fund. If we were to administer 1%, this same assembly passed it. If we were to administer it, even if that is the only thing we have in our consolidated revenue fund, we will be having well over 730 billion for health. So you can say that we are not serious. But this assembly, all Nigerians, that our own law that we passed into our Act 2014, we must meet with it. And then of course, what we have already added, that we are signatories to, that 15% of our annual budget to go to health, we must address that issue. That is when we are doing what we are doing. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, please permit me to quickly tell you.
No. You have to round up now. You cannot tell me. Just conclude and close. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Chief Whip.
Thank you very much, our Senate President, my distinguished colleagues. Shola Adeyeye from the Central Senatorial District of the State of Osun.
4 minutes more.
I want to point our attention to a fact which has been stated repeatedly by our colleagues, that this year budget total 7.29 trillion naira. It represents an increase of roughly 20% above the budget of last year if we are talking about Naira. But in terms of the buying power of that amount, as someone else has pointed out today, it is actually a decrease, because 7.29 trillion naira today is $23.9 billion, whereas last year our budget of roughly over 6 trillion naira represented over $26 billion. So in terms of what we can buy in world market, this year's total budget actually is a decrease versus what we have last year. And I want to say that I recognize that this is not the fault of the executive. It's a fault of all of us and the reality of where the Nigerian economy is. This budget represents for every Nigerian an expenditure of 42,000 naira per person per year. That means that any Nigerian who directly or indirectly can get a benefit of 42,000 naira for himself this year has taken his own fair share of that budget. And any of us who takes more than that, including myself, has taken far more than his own fair share. This tells us, unless we want to deceive ourselves, this tells us that as at today, in terms of economics, Nigeria is a pathetically poor country, and the earlier we wake up to that reality, the better for all of us. Let's look at one aspect of that budget. I'm very much interested in how much we give to education. This year, the total amount given to education is 448 billion naira. That is only $1.47 billion. That is less than 20% of the budget of Harvard University. Our entire education budget for all our universities, all our polytechnics, all our unity schools, all our colleges of education is only about 20% of the budget of Harvard, and we are on the same planet competing with Harvard. The earlier we wake up to our poverty, and the earlier we begin to say, how do we solve the question of poverty, the better. Let's look at the fact that our debt this year, servicing our debt, is going to consume about the same amount as the total money we have voted for our capital projects. And let's then remind ourselves, especially those of us who have long been in the National Assembly, that among the last things that President Obasanjo did in office was to pay off our debt. Once upon a time, we rejoiced that Paris Club forgave $18 billion of our debt. And by the time Obasanjo was leaving office, our total debt was less than $5 billion. Today, we are now spending more to service debt than we did as at the time that Obasanjo and Okonjo-Iweala told us that debt was going to strangle our nation. Today, debt does not have to strangle our nation. We are already strangled. And the solution to me is not palatable. The solution is not palatable. We can talk about more money for this sector or that sector. Where would the money come from? I believe the money will come when we reduce the cost of government. Nigeria extra code is the second highest in the world. It must be slashed. Yes, I'm collecting it, just like you are collecting it. But I'm saying I'm willing to lose it. You too should join me in saying we should all lose it. Secondly, Mr. President, unless we strengthen our private sector for us to pretend that government alone will solve these problems, we are deceiving ourselves. And to do so, I believe we must solve the problem of power. We must solve the problem of infrastructure, especially roads and railway. We must solve the problem of our refinery. We must stop using money to import petrol when God gave us crude. Therefore, no matter what we do in increasing the benchmark to 44.5, some of that money, if not all, must be used to address these critical sectors. That must also include a second Abuja runway. A month from now, many of us will not be coming again because we will be too afraid to be going to Kaduna and driving to this place. If that's the case, we must solve railway, we must solve power, we must solve roads, we must solve refinery, and as early as possible, we must do justice to the education of this country. For us to spend only 1.46 billion for a population of over 170 million to educate our people tells us that we don't care about our future, because the future of this country depends on the education that we offer our children in the race of life. Last thing I will say, in the race of life, those who are behind must run faster than those who are ahead, or they will remain forever behind. Africa is pathetically behind. We must find a way to run faster. Thank you.
Senator Rafi Ibrahim. Senator Alim Dube. Senator Kabuda. Senator Ali Wakil. Senator Are you all right? Very good.
No. Your Excellency, sir. My name is Senator Madam Wakili, MNI. I represent Bauchi South. That includes all the serving senators here because they reside in Bauchi, and including the Chief Executive Officer of Bauchi State, Governor Emir Abubakar. I am their representative here, sir. Everybody has spoken, sir. Most especially the Chief Whip. I want to associate myself and align myself with everything he said. The only thing he didn't say is one or two issues that affects my presidency, sir. I support the President's vision of bequeathing a purposeful leadership to the Nigerian state. But apparently, some of them on board may not be carrying the principles of the President. I feel my constituency has been marginalized. We are talking about critical infrastructure in terms of roads. You go to the Federal Ministry of Works, sir, we discover that close to 17 billion only is to be spent in the Northeast, with a fraction of it coming to Bauchi State, most especially Bauchi South, that has about 4.7 million population, greater than so many of those states. Within the 2016 budgets, there are roads that did appear and they are yet to be processed, but they are missing on the 2017 budget. You take the Bauchi-Jos, Bauchi-Gombe Highway, you take Kashiri, Futuk Yellow Digare to Plateau, is missing. You take Lere Gindiri, it is missing. And other roads that are supposed to be constructed newly that were provided within the 2017 budget. That is why I feel marginalized. We have spoken about agriculture, sir. The greater majority of my people are agriculturalists. We have spoken that we need to diversify, but we are just doing too much talk without this thing. You go to the budget of Ministry of Agriculture, close to 800 million is on research and development. It doesn't have any effect on my people, sir. We have spoken that we need to entrench probity and accountability in the running of affairs. And we have said that where are we going to get money to finance the deficit when we are talking of borrowing? And we have said that most of our money go into recurrent expenditure. So, as I said last year, the challenge is on all of us to go and do our homework properly on oversight function. We need to interrogate, sir, this budget. Take the Ministry of Works budget. You go in a place, they are going to purchase photocopying machines close to 222 million. They are going to purchase vehicles 1,119 at one place. At another place, they are purchasing vehicles close to 482 million. You go, they are talking about construction of public schools. Yes, we need to boost our education. What happens to BEP? What happens to Federal Ministry of Education? How does they come in, sir? You go, they are talking about monitoring and evaluation. Big chunk of money that goes into wastage. There is even a place that they are trying even to indict us, that for them to process budget at the Ministry of Planning and the National Assembly, they have to budget 20 million. And this goes into the estimate. People will begin to think, why must they provide us for our work to do? You will discover that if you go to some of the provisions, there are lump sum money that are not tied to any of the projects. They are allocated to the office of the minister. How are you sure that we are going to be accountable to it? Then you go and discover that they will spend close to 400 million just to hire consultants. You go to TCN, sir, under the Ministry of Mines and Power. They are going to spend 3.5 billion for port charges, clear of goods. What kind of goods are there? Most of those goods that are in there have been there follow. They come under presidential approval because we are trying to help the NPP power, sir. You go to the Nigerian bulk electricity companies, sir. For them to engage a technical advisor, they are spending close to 120 million. And then there's a provision in their budget that says administration and coordination, 1,173,000,000. Sir, those of us in the committees, we need to interrogate this budget. Let me use another example before I sit down, sir, because I just spent 3 minutes. You go to the Federal Ministry of Transport, sir. They are going to complete a control tower at Maiduguri, 555 million. Then you go to Benin, 499 million. Then you come back to Abuja. They are spending close to 2.7 billion. What happens now that we are spending 5 billion to renovate it? We need to sit down, sir, as legislators. Some of these wastages, some of this money can go to the capital project where we are finding it difficult to finance them. Thank you, distinguished President, distinguished colleagues, I'm appreciative.
Senator Bulbrand.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Senator Abu Ibrahim, representing Katsina South. My distinguished colleagues, the 2017 budget is aimed to steer the economy from recession and leads to the economy of sustainable growth. Consequently, opportunities for job creation are planned, and indeed welfare packages of 2016 are to continue. The MTF, in terms of benchmark of oil price, projected oil production, exchange rates, inflation rates, GDP growth rates, and the fiscal deficit were all approved by these hallowed chambers. The progressiveness of this budget can be seen with in these figures, and indeed the progressiveness of the APC government. The figures are: in 2014, the total budget was 4.7 trillion naira. In 2015, it was 4.9 trillion naira. In 2016, it was 6.8 trillion naira. For 2017, it's 7.29 trillion naira. However, most importantly, the capital relationship or the capital percentage of the total expenditure. In 2014, it was 23.8%. In 2015, it was merely 12%. But in 2016, our first budget, it was 30.3% of the total expenditure. For this year, for 2017, it will be 30.73%. So you can see the progress whereby more money is invested in capital projects rather than consumption. But analyzing the budget further, one can clearly see the underlying principle of job creation, diversification of the economy, as well as establishing infrastructure to enhance economic activities within the confines of Nigeria. It also continues with welfare packages, which will spur local purchasing power, as well as uplift the standard of living of the vulnerables. Thus, the amount of money provided, 529 billion for works, housing, power, 262 billion allocation for transport ministry, indicate that the aim was to create jobs through construction works that will take place during the year. The rehabilitation of railway lines that have remained comatose for over 40 years as indication a radical departure from what we used to have in this country. Mr. President, the foundation now is being laid for development of local consumption economy. And what we can see now was the election of Mr. Donald Trump, and British exit from the EU is an indication that protectionism will be now a major issue in the world economy. So we must start thinking to improve our local economy and our local consumption. And this, what his government is planning to do and is investing to do. My distinguished colleagues, we look at other interesting initiatives in this budget. New social housing programs with 100 billion, which will lead to 1 trillion naira investment fund. Special economic zones, whereby 50 billion has been provided, and each zone will have its own economic area of interest. Then there is export expansion grant, EEG, which is 20 billion, to revive export in terms of tax credit. There is recapitalization of Bank of Industries, Bank of Agriculture of 50 billion to finance micro, small, medium scale industries. In case of diversification,
Chief, are we keeping time?
in terms of diversification of the economy, investment and loan grants to farmers will continue. Already we are seeing positive effects in agriculture and especially rice production. Indeed, the proper utilization of natural resources fund will continue. This fund was misused under the previous governments. This year, over 30 billion has been provided to solid mineral sector. Using the fund, the increased investment in these areas will obviously decrease our over-dependence on oil. And power, school feeding, cash payment to the poor, all will continue. These funds will create jobs as well as reduce poverty and improve purchasing power of the lower structure of our society. Finally, distinguished senators, Mr. President, and Chief Whip, I therefore congratulate Muhammadu Buhari and the APC government for steering this nation to path of growth and stability. Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Alindume.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I am Mohammed Alindume, representing Borno South. Mr. President, I understand you called my name when I went to pray. And distinguished colleagues, mine is just an observation and advice on three things in the budget. Our colleagues have spoken well, some experts, and we don't need to dwell so much on that again. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the budget that we have been passing year in, year out lacks what is the most important ingredient, and that is the detail. We come here to pass the budget without seeing the details. This is government of change, and this must change. The details of the budget report should, and as required, must be considered holistically. Last year we had several issues with the budget, in fact, to some extent very embarrassing. And that is because some of us are even innocent. We don't know what was in the budget because the details of the budget was not provided. This should be done this year. The budget of the Senate is not known to the senators. It should be known this year. This is very important because we cannot be taking blames or credit for what we don't know. Mr. President, if you look at 2016 budget, yes, we have been given the budget performance. But what the budget 2016 budget contains in relation to 2017 budget is not available. There should have been a column where 2016 budget summary would be enumerated. Then the 2017 budget would have been detailed out so that we know, because we end up having uncompleted projects. We end up having projects that are new and that will never be executed because we provide for them desperately in order to answer to the call of our colleagues, yet they will not be done, or for technical reasons they will say they will not do it. But if the budget of 2016's column is there and we know what has been released for that particular subhead, then we know what is budgeted for this year or proposed, then we know how to do actual budget work. The committee on appropriation should do that. You know the right thing. Secondly, Mr. President, I want to use this opportunity. I know my colleagues will never be tired of hearing me out on the issue of the humanitarian crisis we are facing in the Northeast. Last time I brought a motion and it was unanimously supported that there is need for us to oversight, coordinate, or monitor what is happening in the Northeast. Distinguished colleagues, for those of us who have gone to the periphery of what is happening in the Northeast, will appreciate the condition we are. There is human catastrophe existing there. The world is there for us, but we are not there for ourselves. The world contributed, as I December 26 last year I said, they contributed 426 billion naira, which translates to about 130 billion, while Nigeria was budgeting 12 billion. And out of that 12 billion, it's only 3 billion that was released. How serious does it show? While we have the sympathy of Nigerians and the whole world, there is nothing on ground. This year, the international community and United Nations donor agencies have budgeted $1 billion. That translates to at least 305 billion naira. That is going at the rate of 305. Yet Nigeria is budgeting in this 2017 budget a party sum of 45 billion. Distinguished colleagues, we are in an emergency situation. I beg you, we need help. This is an emergency situation. I swear to God, today somebody will die because of hunger-related issues in the Northeast. We need to do something. If you say no, it means no, but that is natural, because we don't have food there. There are some areas that are starving, they have no clothes, they have no health facilities. As I tell you now, 22 local governments have been recovered, but there are no villages. There is no village besides the 22 local government headquarters. In my local government that have so many villages, 300,000 population, we only have 2 locations now where all the villages stay. So, distinguished colleagues, I want to beg you to, particularly in the case of the Northeast, to allocate reasonable sum. I know that because of the recession and the financial constraints that we have, we cannot match what the international communities are doing. But we should be seen to be serious about the humanitarian crisis we are facing in the Northeast. Lastly, distinguished colleagues, the issue of social intervention, whose intention is good, but the way it's being managed is poor. I've said it before, 500 billion allocated last year. Chairman of Appropriation raised an issue of capacity to utilize, which manifested and exposed itself. You cannot give a small office somewhere and say let them utilize 500 billion. They cannot do that. So in this budget this year, yes, the social intervention is critical, but it should be decompartmentalized. Take what is for women to women affairs, take what is for education to education, take what is for employment to employment, take what is for skill acquisition to SMEDAN. That is what we should do. If we don't do that, we are just deceiving Nigerians. Why I say so? Because you say to Nigerians, we have budgeted 500 billion for it. And even if that money is released to the office so created, they don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the capacity to reach out. Well, we say now there is employment of graduates beginning, but where is it? And that is because it has not been properly channeled, and that is a responsibility of the National Assembly. I want to thank you, distinguished colleagues, and I hope, particularly the issue of the humanitarian crisis in Northeast, this Senate will now direct the Committee on Appropriation to increase the budget from the party 45 to at least 100. Thank you very much.
Senator Clifford Odia.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, My name is Senator Clifford Odia, representing Edo Central Senatorial District. Let me begin by thanking Mr. President for giving me another chance to contribute to this all-important budget debate. The budget as presented, my dear colleagues, cannot be said to be perfect. And that is why,
Very far from it.
that is why we must do everything humanly possible to address the inadequacies so that the budget can be adjusted that will serve the needs of our people. The problem has always been the implementation of our budget. And that is why we must be very careful with the basic parameters used in arriving at this budget estimate. To this extent, I want to sincerely appeal to government to expedite actions in the current negotiation program they have for the Niger Delta. Because if we are unable to meet up with these parameters, it will be very, very difficult to implement the budget. The inadequacies has a lot to do with education, roads, health, power, and housing. On education, the budget is grossly inadequate, virtually in all the areas that need special attention. That is why government must, as a matter of urgency, implement the needs assessment program that they agreed with ASU. Because if that is not done, the present level of our infrastructural development in our universities and higher institutions will just be a mirage. My advice at this point is that government should quickly negotiate with ASU in order to be able to implement this program. My dear colleagues, you find out that in power, that has become a major problem for our people. Without power, there can never be development. And that is why most investors are still getting very scared about investing in this country. Government must develop the power sector very seriously so that our people can get light for their day-to-day activities. My dear colleagues, I want to draw your attention to the problems of our youth and women in this country. Government must do everything humanly possible at this point in time to do something reasonable for our youth and women. Government must create jobs for our youth with a view to removing them from the streets. Because if our youth are not adequately cared for, there's going to be a very serious problem. My advice is that everything should be possible, to be made possible to make sure that our youth are adequately taken care of by creating jobs for the teeming population of our youth in this country, as well as women. You see, my dear colleagues, I want to also look at the area of women empowerment. Our women need to be seriously empowered because they work on daily basis. They do everything humanly possible to keep this country to be one. And during elections, they are the ones that actually, promote our democracy by coming out in large numbers and vote. Why are we not taking special care of our women today? We must do everything humanly possible to accommodate our women in this year's budget. Finally, my dear colleagues, federal government economic program or direction is still very much unclear. CBN must therefore take a second look at these foreign exchange and demand management policies in order to address these anomalies. Thank you very much, Mr. President and Deputy.
Senator Aidoku.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. President, my highly respected colleagues. Mr. President, My take on this budget is very simple. Mr. President, when we continue to do the same thing year in, year out, every year we do the same thing, and we expect to get a different result, Mr. President, that will be wishful thinking, and that will be looking for a miracle. Mr. President, I say this because what is budget? The budget that is always presented is just a spreadsheet by the bureaucrats and just the juggle figures. The headings of last 2016 is almost the same with 2017, and they just change figures where they find most appropriate. Mr. President, that is not how this budget is supposed to be. The budget is supposed to reflect the policy of government. The budget is supposed to reflect what are the agendas set by a government. Mr. President, I give an example. The Ministry of Solid Minerals, for example, when this government came to power, there is a popular agenda of government that the government is going to diversify from petroleum. Mr. President, thank you for protecting me. Mr. President, government has an agenda to diversify from oil to the solid minerals sector to boost the economy, to earn foreign exchange for government. Mr. President, if you look at the budget, this is not a reflection of the thinking of government. The total budget for the solid minerals sector is 23 billion. There are 9 agencies under the solid minerals ministry. The total capital for these 27 is about 12 billion. Mr. President, just oppose it with the petroleum industry where we are trying to diversify from. The investment and government spending in the oil industry is about 2 trillion naira. And this is where you are thinking, the government is thinking of diversifying from to boost the economy, to generate foreign exchange. Mr. President, you cannot use 12 billion to diversify an economy. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, just a quarry by a Chinese company here in Abuja, its annual turnover is well over 50 billion, much more than the whole total investment, total government spending, total budget of the Ministry of Solid Minerals that have 11 agencies. Mr. President, there is no seriousness in diversifying the economy based on what is in the 2017 budget. Mr. President, this Senate has a responsibility to look at some of these figures without thinking of what will be the outcome in making inputs into the budget. Because a budget that we know that cannot even take us anywhere from the beginning, if we just pass it like that, we are not doing service to this country. Mr. President, the Chinese government that takes solid mineral very seriously, though we can't compare ourselves with the size of China, the Chinese government have an investment of $200 billion in solid minerals fund, mining fund, just to develop the solid mineral. And we can see the result. China, if you look at the rating in solid output in the solid mineral production, you can see what China is making. China is almost topping the world in solid mineral production. But the irony of it is that they don't even have these minerals in their soil in China. Nigeria have a record of having some of the best and most productive sites and most lucrative minerals in this country. We have bitumen, we have gold, we have iron and steel, we have columbite, we have all sorts of, we have lead, we have zinc. These are what push the world economy. But Mr. President, these things are just packed raw by Chinese government, by foreign government, and they just move it to their country, and they have a record that they are the world producers of these items. There's no plan by this government or Nigerian government to even have a seismic studies of where these things are. There's no record. We don't even this as simple as aerodynamics to show where the locations of these things are in this country, where we can even apportion them and allocate them like we allocate oil blocks for investors to come. We don't have these data. There is a need for investments in these areas on issue by issue, on minerals by minerals basis, so that the Ministry of Solid Minerals will have a warehouse of information where foreign investors will come,
get these things, and these things will be done with money. Mr. President, without boring this Senate with all the details of this sector, if the government is genuinely sincere about diversifying the economy to the solid mineral sector, Mr. President, this 12 billion is just a child's play. There has to be an agenda to invest in the solid mineral sector, especially putting it side by side with what is done in the oil sector, so that in the next, so many people have spoken that in some years the oil will dry up. But the solid minerals, fortunately for us, is still virgin, is still there. We can still tap into it when we do it properly. And Mr. President, finally, I want to suggest and advise this Senate that the Senate should not have, because of the experience of last year where it was said that budgets are padded, the figures were broad, were different from what was going out, we should not be intimidated by that. Mr. President, we should look at this budget and do the right thing. Where appropriations are not adequate for things that will move this country forward, we should look at it and make proper appropriations, and Nigerians will see that we have done our part. If anybody wants to question it, well, posterity will judge. I rest my case.
Senator Kofi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My distinguished colleagues, once more, my name is Senator Omar Ibrahim Kurupi, representing Kaduna Sectoral. Mr. President, all that has been said, actually, all what my colleagues have contributed, they are all in the right direction, the right line. The main issue, actually, which I would rather contribute is widening our database, our tax base. Actually, our tax base is very low. So if we can now widen all our tax base, increase taxes where taxes are not being paid, that will earn us more income. Then we need to make new investment in the new revenue stream, like non-oil sector, especially agriculture. I could remember those of us who used to come from the village, we used to know that agriculture was the mainstay of the economy. You will find that during the rainy season, people are selling cotton, groundnut, and if that time they take it to the market, there will be taxed some amount of money, and that raises a lot of revenue. So, Mr. President, that is one area that we should pay attention. Most of my colleagues contributed immensely how to reduce waste and duplication. There is a lot of waste and duplication in some of the sector. So this is also an area that we should look into. And finally, Mr. President, I want to say that I agree with my colleagues that borrowing is almost necessary. Borrowing is international practice. Of course, I know borrowing can be a loaded gun. It can kill you and you can kill it. Because while we use borrowing and doing things, the wrong things, definitely it is not going to help us. But while you use borrowing in the right direction, definitely it will improve my economy. This is my point. I satisfy my case, sir.
Senator Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Boniface, representing Ondo North Senatorial District. I want to join my colleagues that have spoken earlier on in appreciating the aspirations of the federal government in trying to move this country forward. I want to speak particularly in the area of the diversification of the economy. A monolithic economy like ours that depends on oil is very vulnerable and it cannot achieve sustainable growth. And therefore I want to commend the federal government for taking the initiative now to diversify the economy. However, in the budget document, there has been emphasis on agriculture and solid minerals, and many of my colleagues have spoken about it. I want to talk about agriculture in particular. No matter what we spend on agriculture, if we do not add value to what we produce to help us earn foreign exchange, I think we'll just be revolving on one spot. And the only way we can do that is to employ technology innovation to drive this economy. Mr. President, over the years, during the time of Obasanjo, we had Operation Feed the Nation. Under Shagari, we have Green Revolution. Obasanjo again, we have needs. Under Yaradua, we have 7-point agenda. Under Jonathan, we have transformation. We are not in reformation or recovery. Mr. President, all these things are instrumental visions or programs that will not lead us anywhere. And I identify myself with what Senator Dino said. We must have a national vision, a national program that every administration that comes in will key into. If not, all these instrumental programs will not help us. Let us look at the example of Asian tigers. The Asian tigers like South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, they do not have oil. They do not have iron and steel industry. And yet, they are one of the leading nations in terms of economy. What did they do? They have employed science and technology as a driving force of their economy. And what they did, that they have allocated so much resources. I'll give you a small statistics, Mr. President. The federal government of South Korea allocates 1% of the GDP to SCI, Science, Technology and Innovation. The private sector of that country allocates 3.5% of the GDP. That shows commitment. And I believe that if we are talking of diversification of the economy, we must make sure that we integrate science and technology and innovation into our strategies. And I believe we can do much. I will give you an example, Mr. President, what science, technology and innovation can do to our economy. In the time of Obasanjo, the brewing industries depended on malt imported into this country. FIRO, the Federal Institute of Industrial Research of Shoji, came up with a research that malt can be replaced with sorghum and maize. There was protest from the brewing industry. But when the ministry brewed its own beer called Famous Beer, Federal Ministry of Science and Technology beer, which was taken to a foreign trade fair, that beer was judged to be the best. And that is why Obasanjo insisted that the brew industry must change, must convert to sorghum and maize. Today, this country will save billions of dollars by using this local source material. Mr. President, there are many examples. Now, in science and technology, we can make brake pad from palm kernel, brake pad that is superior to what is imported into this country. And I think in trying to diversify the economy, the federal government must pay attention to application of science, technology, and innovation. What has been allocated is very, very inadequate. Having said this, Mr. President, I want to commend the federal government for increasing the allocation to the free trade zones. We have about 6 in this country now. I know what the free trade zone can do to this country in terms of foreign investment, in terms of job creation, in terms of transfer of technology. And I think I want to commend the federal government for increasing allocation to the establishment of more free trade zones in this country. Sir, one of my colleagues, Solomon, said that the Federal Minister of Science, Federal Minister of Finance, said that 900 billion naira have been released in terms of capital, and yet we can't see it. The reason, sir, is that the Bureau of Public Procurement has continued to be a bottleneck for the implementation of programs. And I think there's a need to look into their performance, to review the procedure which they use in issuing certificate of no objection, so that they will not continue to be a bottleneck for the implementation of our budget.
Thank you. Senator Buhari Abdul Fattah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished colleague, my name is Buhari Abdul Fattah. I'm not sick. The difference between 2016 budget and 2017 budget, Mr. President, is 2.9% 8% on the capital, 8.8% on the recurrent. But that is not the issue. How far do we go with the implementation of budget that will give us results? These are the things we do every year. Mr. President, last year when we were discussing the budget, more than 60 to 70% of our people were talking on power. And at that time, all of us agreed that there's nothing and there's no way a nation can grow without electricity. At that time, we were having over 5,000 megawatt supply of electricity. Today, as I'm talking to you, we have less than 3,000 megawatt of electricity. So what happened between last year that we were shouting that we need electricity to survive? And the truth of the matter is that, like everybody has been saying, we don't have what is called long-term plan. Just like the way it affects us at the airport. How come that we now want to close our airport just because we want to do runway? Because there's no backup. On the electricity, since we knew we have several dams, like Ikere Gorge Dam in Shaki, Goroyo in Sokoto, and then Balpori in Guzo, all these dams can supply over 6,000 megawatts. What is the government doing about backup for them? Is it until everything collapses? Secondly, look at the way we are trying to reinvest on the railway. There is a law in the economy, the law of purchasing parity, where every price of goods will be zero if cost of will be equal if the price of transportation is zero. But the truth of the matter is that the investment in that rail can help boost the economy. The only way it can boost the economy is when we push and make sure the price of transportation is reduced. When it comes down that way, it will help. The capital must be spent, there must be spending on capital. We must be able to spend nothing less than 80 to 90% of our capital. That is the only way you can push out of recession. We agree that if a country have negative growth 2 times, you're already in recession. Coming out of speed is very difficult. The only way you can do it, you must be disciplined, know what you are doing. For us to be able to get out of this, we have to be disciplined about implementation of our budget. This is not negotiable. Yeah,
point of order, leader.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I move that we suspend Order 13.2 to sit beyond 2 o'clock to enable our colleagues make their contributions to the debate.
Minority Leader.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, rise. The second motion, I'll move by the leader. I say second.
Distinguished colleagues, those in favor that we suspend 13.2 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Yes, Senator, we can continue.
So, Mr. President, the only way we can get out of this problem we are having today in this country is when we are serious about implementing the budget. The budget must not be taken that, look, we do it only when we want. We have a target. Let's reinvest in capital project. Let's pay the people. Let the purchasing power of the public increase. That is the only way you move to the 0 digit and get ready out of recession. Mr. President, year in, year out, we come here, we discuss budget. Next year, we'll still be coming here to discuss about budget. Follow up is one of the key that can help this country. I believe when we go to the appropriation committee and we start seeing where we are spending, comparing with what happened, the allocation given to 2016, we will be able to make that analysis and move this country forward. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Obioma Agige. Senator Samayao.
At last. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Very distinguished colleagues. My name is Senator Sam Anyang. I represent Imo East, Imo State. Mr. President, before I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak on the general principle of this budget estimate. But before I do, I want to recall and refresh your memory on your budget speech on the 14th of December 2016 when you welcome Mr. President of the country to the National Assembly chambers. I'll quote, "Our people must see that the singular preoccupation of government is the search for solution to the current economic hardship and the commitment to ease this their burden. They don't want to know what political parties we belong, what language we speak, or how we worship God. They have trusted their faith into our hands, and they need us now more than ever to justify the trust they have reposed on us. The people of Nigeria will pardon us if we do one thing wrong, but they will not forgive us if we do nothing. And that is why, Mr. President, the two chambers have taken a position, whatever may be our differences or opinion on issues of the economy. We will all work with one common purpose for this reason." I quote. Mr. President, I want to appreciate today the position of my colleagues in this chamber, especially from the ruling majority party, because I have seen from the debate, the tune of this debate, that this elect or this group have conquered fear. The tune of our debate last year is not the tune of our debate this year, because this recession is something that is spiritual. It's something you cannot see, you cannot touch, but it's touching everybody. And the only thing that can unite people is welfare. The economy of this country have united all of us, and we must dwell on that to make sure that our people that we are representing are happy. My colleague Buhari has said something, the other Buhari of this net have said something very important, which is electricity, and that's where I want to dwell. All these things we're talking about, the economy, the health sector, agriculture, and all that, if we do not get electricity or power right, this economy will not grow. And I want to say the solution to this problem is to declare state of emergency on power. Mr. President, they are talking about skill acquisition, they are talking about learning trades. After all these things, where is the power to operate? They will still throw them back to the streets. So I think that the only first thing we should do, yes, you will build good hospitals, and there's no power to energize most of the high equipments in these hospitals, it will still not work. I think even if you have agriculture, and you don't have a silos working, you don't have storage facilities which will be powered by electricity, yet we have done nothing. Even if you have education, I have big good schools, and students cannot have a comfortable place to read, then we have not achieved anything. I think we must declare state of emergency on power. Today, I know so many young men who want to learn trades, who want to establish their own businesses, barbing salon, other tailoring and other things. They cannot operate without electricity. Today, we have sort of allowed a cabal who are interested to make sure that power does not exist in Nigeria, who uses their own condition to bring in generators of all kinds. It's only Nigeria that you will see different kinds of generators that bears them, some bear Igbo them, some bear outside them, some bear Yoruba them, all in the name of generator. We have failed, and I want to say this, where I refresh your mind, is that we have a commitment with the people of this country, and if we do not do, I remember what Awudo used to say, I said it again last year, in 2004, when we were elected as local government chairman, governors, senators, and House of Reps. He said one thing, and I quote, that there must be two addresses for those of you who are elected. The address where we fall back after you leave this place, because one day you must leave. The second quotation is that we have people, old men, young men, who came out under the rain and sun to vote for us. The only thing they expect from us is dividend of democracy. And if we don't give it to them, they will start murmuring. And the murmuring will turn into a curse which no fortune teller can cure, and I quote. So it is important, as a people that represent the people, that we must look at this issue. Power is very, very important. Today, in most of these places, there are areas. I was watching a place in Benin. The chief in that area said that for the past 3 years, they have not seen electricity. There's a place in Lagos State, I think Ogun State also. For the past 5 years, they have not seen electricity. How can those people survive? What would the youth in that area do to survive? So I think there must be a declaration of emergency on power. This is my submission, and that's the only way we can come out of this recession. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ayusabi Abdullahi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am Aliu Sabi Abdullahi, Niger North. Distinguished colleagues, I want to lend my voice to this very important debate. And I think my job is made a little bit easier, especially from the last speaker, who reminded Mr. President of a very important point he has raised. And I would like to add to that by saying that the budget speech by Mr. President was in some way very clear on certain issues. For example, he said it should have a clear roadmap of policy actions and steps designed to bring the economy out of recession. And in doing so, the same speech noted the fact that we need to be able to produce our own food, grow and process our food. We should be able to patronize made in Nigeria goods. We should be able to focus on local content and our entrepreneurs. Now, the whole of these statements, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, to me should be seen as the higher policy for which this budget must be gauged. Now, if you make a policy pronouncement, what is expected is that the MDAs are supposed to translate that policy pronouncement into concrete programs, projects, and initiatives that, when implemented, will surely achieve that same higher policy goals as enumerated by Mr. President. And I think our job is not done, like Mr. President rightly said in this chamber, that until Nigeria is out of recession, our job as senators of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is not done. And I think this point must not be lost on all of us. Now, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, what I have seen from this budget is some element of inconsistency. When we say, for example, the budget of change which we had last year was designed to lay the foundation. The budget this time around is budget of recovery and growth, which means that we are accepting there has been some pains or some losses, and we want to recover from that. And not just to recover, but to grow. And I think if this is the policy intent, then the programs and projects that should come from the MDAs must be seen very practically to reflect how this will be achieved. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, for example, we talked about medical tourism, and I think the huge sums of money being lost as forex in this particular aspect, even from last year's budget, was a major issue. But if you check the budget, there is nowhere you will see any program or project designed to reduce the number of people who will have the need to fly out for their medical treatment. And I think we must begin to put a stop to some of this inconsistency by ensuring that the programs from these MDAs must reflect this policy intent. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I would like to make 3 points. The issue of youth unemployment, and I think some of my colleagues have mentioned this very critically. The present unemployment rate, as given by the National Bureau of Statistics, is very scary. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, as at the last quarter, 2016, quarter 4, the figure is 45.65% of our youth unemployment. And if you look at this figure, honestly, it is something very worrisome. Now, my question is, if the youth are truly the leaders of tomorrow, and if we want to live in the future where these youths will be that leaders, by which time perhaps some of us have already expired and are by the side, what manner of arrangement are we making for them? What are the programs designed to address the future these youths are going to be leading? And I think this is where our job must be seen to be done. Now, who will deliver the jobs? And I think when we come to look at this budget at the committee levels, it is very important that every committee should be able to come back here to say that from each sector, there is guarantee that social amount of jobs
will be delivered to the Nigerian youth, and that we are capable of tracking it down and reporting progress on them. Now, the other aspect is poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. The earlier submission by Alin Dume was talking about the pains in the IDPs, and some people may die as a result of that. Now, I think this is something happening all over in this country, and if you look at the poverty rate, it is very disturbing, and I think it is very important for us to do something in this budget to make sure that we are tackling the issue of poverty. Lastly, Mr. President, the issue of rural development. It is said often in many statistics that 60 to 70% of Nigerians live in rural areas. But Mr. President, if you look at this budget, I'm afraid there seems to be no concrete effort to address the rural inequalities in terms of development. And if we must get our economy out of recession, then the larger percentage of people who live in rural areas, we must address all those things that will enable them to contribute their own quota in increasing the economic activities. But this budget, what I have seen, 7 billion, for example, in the Ministry of Agri, is all I see with respect to rural development. I think we need to do something about it. Finally, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, there are communities that are marginal and marginalized. And I think earlier on, my good friend is saying he represents the largest senatorial district. Mine is in terms of land area. My senatorial district is 41,000 square kilometers, and I want to say that it's largely rural with very bad roads. And I know Senator Nala has to pass through my constituency to go home, and he knows, even though he fly over, but I'm sure he sees the very bad road that these constituencies have. And if we are doing anything, I want to submit that this budget must also bring people who are in the marginal area so that they will have a sense of belonging and feel that yes, the federal government is truly looking after them. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Senator Carroll. Gianni Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. My name remains Tijani Hayakawa Zamfara North. Your Excellency, the 2016 and 17 budget, by and large, are similar in approach. The only distinction is the amount of money allocated sectorally. However, the major drawbacks we have seen in the 2016 budget has to do with late presentation of the budget, its late approval, which eventually led to late implementation of that budget. It is therefore advisable for me to say that this time around the Senate should, as a matter of fact, hasten the passage and the approval of this budget, even though we have to be sure also that the defense is extremely very thorough. Mr. President, looking closely at the budget, comparatively between 2016 and 2017, I want to use this opportunity to commend the executive for ensuring a balance in terms of sectoral allocations to the geopolitical zones. When I look at it carefully, I was convinced that each geopolitical zone of the country have significantly been attended to almost equitably. I think this is very commendable. However, Mr. President, the issue of disparity between the CBN exchange rate and that of the Bureau de Change is so wide that this budget must make an attempt to narrow it. Otherwise, the benefit of the budget to the people will not be felt as much as possible. Mr. President, on the issue of diversification, which has always been amplified by government, last year around this time, we were here talking on the principles of budget, and when I stood up, my observation was that government did not follow action with its words in terms of ensuring that agriculture and solid minerals as well as tourism were given attention in the 2016 budget. And at that time when I raised questions, the answers that were given to me was that there was no adequate security to allocate huge amount of money for solid minerals, for mining and for farming. Now that we have achieved some certain level of security, I thought government would have allocated huge amount of money in agriculture and solid minerals so that the issue of diversification would be seen to be real. I think both the appropriation committee and the various committee need to look at this issue and act accordingly. Second, fourthly, Mr. President, whenever we bring bills or motions in the Senate here, we talk about problems in various sectors. So also, I know several motions were brought and bills, and discussions were made on Nigeria's foreign policy to the extent that it was difficult for Nigeria to achieve its foreign policy if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is underfunded. Looking at what we have this year also, it is very clear that it's not different from 2016 budget. We have traveled widely and we have seen about 5 months in 2016, a number of our foreign officers outside this country could not get their salaries for the simple reasons that the budget was predicated on 197 naira per dollar, but to acquiring such exchange was about 305 naira at that time, and it was difficult for even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get foreign exchange that they could pay school fees and so on and so forth for their people outside the country. Lastly, Mr. President, I also noticed, looking at the budget critically, there is a very serious structural deficiency in some of the items being duplicated severally. For instance, issues like travels and transport, local travels, international travels, other utility charges, other fuel costs, and so on and so forth. When you look at this budget, you see them being repeatedly in one MDS. You see these issues being repeated every now and then. And I don't think this is healthy for an economy that is also in recession. So I feel that the Appropriation Committee and various committees of the Senate should look at these particular items. There is a very serious structural disparity in this area. This includes sporting activities, honorarium, medical expenditure, refreshment, meals, and so on and so forth. If you look at different MDAs, you see them being repeated almost 3 times under one MDA. So I hope we look at this and make sure that we are in recession. We don't need these things. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Chukwuka Tazi. Senator Parker.
Mr. President, Senator Parker Emmanuel is my name, Bielsa Sectoral. Mr. President, dear colleagues, budget normally comprises of derivable revenue and then the expenditure. Let me start with that aspect. And the 2017 budget is not different. The revenue derivable is about 4.9 trillion naira. And then you have a capital budget of about 2.2 trillion. Mr. President, if you look at this closely, there is a gap which the budget addresses through deficit of 2.3 trillion. Mr. President, dear colleagues, you will agree with me that this deficit almost amounts to about 50% of what is in our purse. That is the revenue that would derive at the end of the year. Mr. President, dear colleagues, putting these three parameters into consideration, you will agree with me that with this deficit, what we actually have in our purse to pursue the capital aspect of this budget rests on external factor. That is our success in assessing this money outside government coffers. Mr. President, this trend is very dangerous because it's just like a family man going out to borrow to feed his family. If that person who's supposed to give you this money does not give you the money in question, that is, you cannot fend for your own family. And there lies my fear, Mr. President, that what we depend on the capital to execute is outside our control. And year in, year out, the greatest problem of budget is implementation. And with these parameters in place, my fears are heightened that the implementation of this budget will be very, very difficult. Mr. President, aside these three areas which I've mentioned, you have about 1.6 trillion naira to service your debt. Yes, I agree that this 1.6 trillion will be paid to maybe contractors who are a bit old. And Mr. President, most of these contractors, you'll agree, have not seen the light of the day since this administration came to power. And then servicing their debt. Yes, it's good that this money will go into circulation. And thus putting a bit of breadth to the private sector. But most of these debt that will service will end up in the bank, servicing the debts that are being owed by these private individuals. And Mr. President, there lies the danger that if we use what we borrow to service debts and not the capital area of the budget, then we are doomed. Because what we supposed borrow is supposed to go into the, to assist developing the infrastructure so that we can get more money back into the system. And if the private sector is not developed, there is no way the economy will grow. And this is a budget that intends to increase the growth and the well-being of Nigeria. With these parameters, Mr. President, it is difficult for us to achieve this. And I think government should look at it closely. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I couldn't have commented on the benchmark because we have deliberated exhaustively on it during the interim. However, Mr. President, the gap between what is provided of the 4.4 dollars per barrel and the present cost of oil, which is above 50, gives a gap which will swell up the purse of government. Yes, this differential is very good. Every country, every family have to save for the rainy day. But Mr. President, my fear again is, in this case what you call the SS crew. Give it 3 months or thereabout. Governors will come with their hands begging before Mr. President that this money be shared. And then this money will be shared eventually. And so this gap, there is need for this assembly to narrow the gap between what is available in market and what is practically on ground. Mr. President, we should not even forget the idea that in a country like Nigeria, where the downstream sector is ill-developed, the rising cost of price in oil has its own bad effect. The petroleum product which we bring in
every day to service the total consumption requires requires a lot of money to be addressed. So, Mr. President, this gap, if it is not done, will even creep into our foreign reserve. And so, Mr. President, I believe the downstream sector should be addressed so that most of these funds that are going out to service the day-to-day running of our petroleum product consumptions will be done within the country. And my fear again is that the pump price is about 145 per liter. But finally, Mr. President, my advice to government is to prepare for the unforeseen and manage the so-called excess crude very well, so that some of this money that we save during this period of great differential between what is obtainable in the market and what is put in the budget can be used to address some of these issues. I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Poker. Senator Philip Gunka.
Mr. President, my distinguished colleague, I am Senator Philip Arua Gunka, representing Nasarawa North in Nasarawa State, the home of Solid Mineral. I would like to make these few comments on this year's appropriation bill. The 7.298 trillion amount apportioned for this year's appropriation, representing about 20.4 above last year's gross budget, is a little bit commendable. However, I would like to make these few points clear here. We are talking of the current budget estimate, and the deficit stood at 2.36 trillion, representing 2.18% above the total budget of last year. I want to say here that we're talking about the total deficit. And in the deficit we're talking about, we have not considered most of the issues that this country is being affected. The deficit, we think about what the issue of the economic recession that we are having today or are facing today. This deficit will go a long way to compound the issue of the deficit we are having and the economic recession that we're going through. It is not necessary when we look about one, where the incomes come in. Most of Nigerians today, most of the highest ranking people are not being taxed. They are not paying their due accordingly. And we're talking of the deficit, and we're talking of borrowing. If we are talking of borrowing, we should look into the area to which this borrowing is going to be invested upon. We considered also the issue of we are worried about this growing budget deficit because it compounds the growing domestic and external debt. We want to urge the government to find more creative and boosting environment of promoting the tax earning of this nation. When we look into it, also I want to consider also here the point where some areas of my own constituency is also being neglected in this budget of 2017. My constituency is the only constituency I think that is being neglected. We don't have even one single federal presence. None of the federal presence is being reflected in our own constituency. The only projects that are supposed to, the Wamba across Bokos road that have been earmarked since 2 years ago, have not been even affected in this year's budget. I want to call on this place too, that at least for equal distribution and equality and equity, and according to the federal character in the Constitution, our own constituency should be also considered. We're talking of the 5,000 monthly grant being allocated for social welfare. We feel, because there is no good statistic that has taken and considered what the budget of the area that have been earmarked for this the area have been earmarked for the poverty alleviation. One more time. If this 5,000 naira is being allocated, more especially to the areas that are having crisis, like the IDPs, and the area like IDPs, people like in northeast, southern Kaduna, part of the north central, like Nasarawa State, and that we have these IDPs. If that one is employed into that, I think we should be able to do much better than that. I would like to recommend that the budget revenues goes for social infrastructure. We should think about using the money in capital investment, the ones that can produce more of the produce that we can export, rather than the one we are importing. More especially in agriculture. When we talk of in agriculture, we should encourage that the commercial agriculture, and not just bring about domestic agriculture in this sector. If we do that, I think that will go a long way in helping us to actualize what we are going to actualize in this project. As always, my speaker.
Thank you so much. Senator Shitu.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm Senator Mohammed Ubali Shitu, representing Jigawa North East Sectoral Zone. Mr. President, I have listened to a number of contributors talking about borrowing, forgetting that we are in recession. Whoever in a recession must borrow. So the act borrowing by government should be seen as an effort to augment the little resources we have. Secondly, I would like to advise the government to improve in their relationship with various sectors of government. There's no reason why one would assume knowledge of everything. Through consultation, discussion, and synergy between various arms of government, we will be able to improve on what we have. That notwithstanding, the budget presented by Mr. President, despite our economic predicament, is commendable and ambitious and people-centered. And I would like to commend the increase in allocation in education, agriculture, health, water resources, power, and docks. Furthermore, government must be praised for giving priority attention to manufacturing, solid mineral, meat and downstream oil and gas sectors, as well as wider social inclusion through job creation. Mr. President, no matter how we budget, no matter how good we have a plan, we will not achieve the desired objectives unless they are fully implemented. As such, I will call on the government to improve the process of implementation. Because each year we plan, you end up only the recurrent expenditure is executed 100%. You will discover a number of reasons why even never touched. And there is no way we will keep on budgeting and not implementing them. Furthermore, on the issue of recurrent expenditure, there is a need for government to check abuses in the current expenditure. Because we will discover a lot of things are being repeated annually. Purchase of computers, purchase of vehicles. So many unplanned things are usually included in the recurrent expenditure. And by reducing it to maybe 30%, that will make us have more money for the capital expenditure. Finally, I wish to commend the effort of the government despite our dwindling economy. We are still moving forward. Hopefully, by the end of 2017, Nigeria will achieve greater position than where we are now. Thank you very much.
Senator David Umuru.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is David Umaru. I represent Niger East. Mr. President, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this 2017 budget and to say that I would start on the positives of the budget, particularly from the perspective of my constituency and state. I would like to state that my constituents are gladdened by the fact that this budget has allocation for the dualization of the Suleja-Mina Road and also the provision being made for the construction of the completion of the Mina Terminal Airport building. Distinguished colleagues will recall that the interaction we had with the Honorable Minister clearly showed that the Mina was shot out of contention for the alternative airport to be used when the Abuja airport is shut down because of, one, the road, and then two, the terminal. Even though some of the issues that were raised against the Mina airport were actually not accurate. I would equally like to show gratitude also for the allocation made for the Hyperdeck Hydroelectric Power Producing Areas Commission. I would urge the presidency to expedite action on the constitution of the board, which is pending before the presidency, so that we will be able to access the funds that will eventually be appropriated for the commission. Mr. President, I would like to observe that the allocation to NEMA appears to be very inadequate, particularly because of the mounting humanitarian crisis that we are having. Efforts have been made geared towards the northeast, but from the happenings in southern Kaduna, Niger State, particularly the last particularly the last crisis we had in Boso, whereby about 5,000 persons were displaced. No adequate arrangement is being made or planned for this crisis. And I think we have the same problem in Benue State, even all over the country. So I think to allocate that amount of money to NEMA will not be addressing the issues as they should. I equally want to reiterate also the importance of, which was actually mentioned by distinguished Senator Olujimi, this issue of the issue of zero budgeting. Mr. President, it is not quite clear whether that principle was adopted in the 2017 budget. I would urge that when we come to the committee level consideration of the budget, that legislators must demand for explanation from the MDS on how this policy was implemented. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ben Mary Bruce. The last person, Senator Konkoso.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Distinguished senators, my name is Rabi Musa Konkoso, representing Kano Central. Mr. President, I thought you would call me immediately after Adiola, my brother, Senator Adiola, to
your mic.
The largest constituency. Mr. President, I'm happy that he's well dressed, red, white, and black today. As Konkosia. As Konkosia. And those who are dressed like that, Mr. President, will always say the truth and stand by it. And the truth of the matter is Kano is the most populous state in Nigeria. It's not true. And Kano Central is the most populous constituency, and I'm here representing it with about 760 votes on my side. Mr. President, as the chairman of National Planning and Economy, I want to say that the parameters, especially the 2.2 million barrels per day, the $44.5 per barrel, and of course the exchange rate of 305 per dollar. I want to say that despite all the challenges, I believe that if we put our hands together and act together, all those are achievable. And let me say that especially the 2.2 million barrels per day, I want to appeal to the federal government to ensure that all the stakeholders are taken on board. The senators from that side and all of us, the elders, the ministers, the governors from the Niger Delta, the youth, and all those concerned should be involved so that peace can be restored to that part of the country. And by that, I'm sure the 2.2 million barrels per day can be achieved. Mr. President, let me also appeal to all of us, and I'm happy that we are doing that, and that is ensuring that this budget is passed and is passed as soon as possible. And other responsibilities of the National Assembly, especially the Senate, and that is the oversight function, is done effectively to ensure that every naira being budgeted is being utilized effectively. Let me also appeal to the executive side of government to ensure the early release of monies, especially to areas that
will help in terms of poverty alleviation, in terms of infrastructural development, the ministries of agriculture, infrastructure, health, and so on and so forth. And also to ensure that it keeps its eyes on the operators, because keeping eyes on operators is very important. Otherwise, no matter the amount of money that is being released to these ministries, departments, and agencies, they will end up being wasted. Therefore, Mr. President, I want to say that I'm very much optimistic. If we put our hands and act together, this year 2017, by the grace of God, will be much better than 2016. Thank you, and God bless you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all those that contributed in the debate today. I will continue with the list also for tomorrow. Leader of the Senate.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, having concluded today's proceedings,
Thank you, Leader. At this point, the Senate will be back again at 10 o'clock tomorrow to continue the last day of the debate on the principles of the budget, and tomorrow will be the last day for all those that have not had an opportunity to contribute. We'll try and start early as well, because we have a sizable number. I think it's 27 again tomorrow. So on this note, the Senate is hereby adjourned till Thursday, the 26th January 2017 at 10 a.m. prompt.